Good afternoon, and welcome. I'm assuming that I'm on, and it's always very interesting talking to a computer screen, but I know you're out there, and I'm excited to be here, and we're going to launch into native, and I did stick in a little word here for those of you offended. You know, you can throw tomatoes at me. I can't see it anyway, so go ahead, throw those tomatoes now. This is native alternatives to invasive garden choices. And as I looked at the list, I noticed that some of you are from far and wide, and we're going to have to take that into account as we go through this. So I'm John Peter Thompson. I'm on Twitter as Invasive Notes. That's pretty easy to remember, and I'm usually there unless I'm giving a webinar, so you can get a hold of me through Invasive Notes. And I have a blog called Invasive Notes, big surprise. There's the blog address. And if you Google Invasive Notes or me, I usually show up on the first couple of pages. We'll give you more contact information after we start. One last thing, because I don't know what you know and I have no way of judging the audience, I look at this as an introduction to the topic. We could maybe later, if enough of you want a more detailed presentation, but I want you to bear with me. If some of this is familiar, well, repetition helps us keep focused. This is an introduction to the topic. And to start with, well, all garden issues, like all invasive species problems, are local in nature. This is like politics. The Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, in the 1980s said all politics are local, so I've sort of borrowed that. Local politics affect global things. Local garden issues and local plant choices and local ecosystems affect the global community. But unfortunately, we can't start globally with a one-size-fits-all, and I want you to bear that in mind, especially those of you who are not part of the lower Chesapeake Bay Mid-Atlantic ecosystem region. Again, I'm going to focus this at a high scale, as you see, but my plant choices are the ones that I see looking out my window. If you're interested in this topic, it's very easy for us to develop a program like this for your landscape, your environment, your ecosystem. So keep that in mind, even though my plant choices are mid-Atlantic. If you're in the Northwest, we could develop a program like this for your plants. If you're in Arizona, we can do one for you based on your plant communities. I feel bound to go over some basics here. And we're going to get to pictures. It's not going to be all reading. Again, I bear with me a little bit here, but invasive plants are weeds of natural areas and other non-agricultural lands. In fact, weeds are invasive plants in managed areas, and invasive plants are weeds for non-managed areas. It's the same thing. It's plants that don't belong in a specific place. An invasive species is a non-indigenous, alien, exotic, foreign, introduced species that is or may cause harm to the local community. They're not naturally occurring, and they are introduced intentionally or unintentionally by people. They reproduce aggressively and replace naturally occurring plant species. Of course, that's what a weed does in a garden, and so there is overlap here. And they affect food, shelter, and aesthetic sensibilities. And they also change soil pH, fire ecology, and other broad ecological factors that we're not going to consider today in detail. Ecologists view the nursery industry and therefore gardeners as being hort-sided, and that shouldn't be a surprise. This is where I normally would be hearing a snicker in the audience, but I'm assuming that you got the joke and we can move on. Many introduced species reportedly are assigned to the vagaries or the specificities of the nursery industry. The nursery and gardening community gets a lot of the blame for invaders of natural systems. That's because often the nursery industry chooses to grow specific species that are alien, exotic, foreign, non-native, non-indigenous species for assorted reasons, as we will see in this presentation. It's useful to remember that a plant is a problem in one place may not be a problem in another. Just because you're having a problem, if you're a farmer and you have hybrid tea roses in your cornfield, that's a problem. It's not necessarily a problem for an arboretum with a rose garden. And sometimes the problems are so big that they get ignored, and hopefully we can deal with that a little bit here. All right, so now we'll get to the pictures. That was the background. Not dwelling on that. I'm hoping that everybody here is here because they have some knowledge that invasive plants, invasive species, are a problem and we need to deal with it, and that others of you are here because you're gardeners and you don't want to contribute to the problem. So here is an example of a problem in one place and native in one place or beneficial in one place is not necessarily good. I don't know whether we have any Hawaiians on, but you know, fountain grass on lava flows in Hawaii is not a good thing. You're not supposed to be seeing a field of grass over here on the right. Pennisetums can be native, and some pennisetums can be not native. Nativeness is a local issue. It's an ecosystem issue. And before everybody gets throwing more tomatoes at me, even the problem of defining native is problematic. I ask you to think, what is native at 600 parts per million CO2? I should be getting silence as an answer. But we know that this fountain grass does not belong on the big island of Hawaii. Another example of invasives, and with climate change, maybe my pictures are a little out of date. I've been giving this talk for over 20 years. Lithium in zone 4.3, climate zone 4.3, is maybe not a problem. Of course, figuring out what zone you are as the planet heats up may make this a slide I need to reconsider. But lithium in a swamp in Connecticut and New Jersey, along the New Jersey Turnpike and down here into the Chesapeake, certainly is a problem as it forms a monoculture. Monoculture being one species that outcompetes, outgrows, ouestablishes all other species, so that you have an ecosystem or a garden of one plant. That is not a good thing. Lithium is and has been in North America since early 19th century, maybe even earlier, sort of well-behaved until we started fragmenting all of our forests and draining our swamps and putting in drainage ditches. It sort of behaved and didn't cause a problem. We're not quite sure why, other than the fragmentation of the landscape, lithium has exploded, but exploded it has. And yes, it's a beautiful garden plant. I used to grow some 20 varieties of it in the 80s. Another garden plant that is a bad actor but a staple of the garden community is Japanese barberry. Up in New England, it's the scourge. I believe even the Canadians are having problems in Ontario with this plant. And we're finding it down here in the mid-Atlantic and parts south in natural areas. This is a mainstay of the landscaper's palette. We got to find alternatives to this plant. Why would you plant a barberry? Well, for one, it has thorns. If you want to keep people, focus them as they pull into a parking lot, and you don't want them to walk through your grassy areas, you want them to go right into your Starbucks, you plant barberry. It keeps them from taking shortcuts because the thorns work as natural barbed wire. It has an evergreen color. There are many reasons that people in the past have chosen barberry, and this is a plant introduced by the nursery industry in the after the Civil War, I think about 1880. However, a natural area, a park, a woodland, a forest full of barberry is catastrophic. So the point of this is there are many horticultural plants that gardeners use that we love, that we use without thinking. I'm speaking as an old nurseryman. That perhaps we should be looking for alternatives. And one of the ways, there's so many sources now, first of all. When I first gave this talk, my talk was a source. Now there are books, online sources, many NGOs, nonprofits, Nature Conservancy, invasive plant councils, and of course my friend Jill and her book from the National Park Service, Plant Invaders of the Mid-Atlantic Natural Areas. And of course she's moved on suggesting alternatives in her book, which is just great. So there are places to find what I'm talking about. You no longer have to wait for me to come and talk to you. So we're going to talk today about some problems, perennials, miscanthus, purple loosestrife. We'll talk about ground covers, which are a big problem in gardens because some of the best ground covers are the biggest invasives, and I'll explain why that would be. We'll talk about vines. Vines were born to be invasive. We'll talk about shrubs. You can see the ones I'm going to touch on, and then a couple trees. This is a sample. Remember, this is an introduction. Every community, every ecosystem has its own ornamental bad actors, and they differ by community. I'll mention a few as we go, as I know. Remember, we're talking about alternatives, garden alternatives, mostly native, so that you don't have to choose these alien exotics. Gardening is about making choices, and what you have to do as a gardener is ask, why are you planting it in the first place? So if you were choosing purple loosestrife to plant in your garden, were you picking it for the flower color, for when it blooms, for how tall it is, for the texture of the leaves and the form of the bush? Were you choosing it for your garden because it tolerates just about any condition? Were you choosing it for the so-called low maintenance characteristics? And by low maintenance, let me point out that loosestrife grows in a swamp. It grows in a too much water, little water. You can mow over it. You can weed whack it. You can spray it with Roundup accidentally, weed killers, not often, but at least once, and it keeps on coming back. People can drive over it with go-karts. Children and dogs can run over it. It's pretty indestructible. Even the Japanese beetle and other invasive species can't keep it under control. So some gardeners might pick it because they'd see this low maintenance. And maybe you picked it because, yes, pollinators come to it. So these are characteristics that you might use to pick loosestrife that we're going to use to map another choice. Maybe a native fits all of this too. And that's what we're looking for. So starting with one of my favorites in the 1980s, I, as a nurseryman, a grower of perennials, I could hardly wait for the latest miscanthus variety. I had a half an acre of a show garden of just miscanthus varieties, and I was actually playing around with trying to come up with a new one. This isn't an area where I was successful. In about 1989, I was informed by some of my customers that my plant was invasive, and I had no idea what they were talking about. And by 1990, I was hearing at professional meetings that miscanthus was a bad plant, and I still had no idea what anybody was talking about. I was told that my sterile varieties of miscanthus were not sterile. So not believing people, I went with my friend and colleague, the man who took the pictures, Larry Hurley, and we sowed some seed in a greenhouse setting of supposedly sterile miscanthus, and lo and behold, we got, I don't remember whether it was 80, 90, 95% or 60%, but we were amazed that our sterile varieties were not sterile, at least in greenhouse conditions. And then by the early 90s, we noticed on our 80-acre production nursery that we were getting miscanthus popping up in strange little places, in walkways, and mud puddles, and in driveways. Easily controlled, but enough to set us on a course as a nursery that maybe there was a problem here. we took unilateral action and we began to make some assessments of cultivars in the 90s. The ones that seeded early, flowered early, they tended to be the ones that seeded in Maryland, so we suggested and stopped carrying those and said you should do the late ones. But more importantly, we said, is there an alternative? Can we find a way to not be part of the problem of not having miscanthus on the edge of 95, not having it in the drainage ditches from here to Raleigh-Durham? Could we not be part of the problem? Which meant, could we ultimately recommend something besides these beautiful plants that we had been selling in the 80s? I don't want to spend a lot of time on the particulars here. I can send you this information. You can find this online. But alternatives. Why does it have to be miscanthus? Why can't we use George Bush's favorite grass? Who knows? Maybe we can actually heat our house with our ornamentals if they ever get that figured out. And so we began to say perhaps panicum, native, could be used ornamentally and substituted. It had almost all of the features of miscanthus. Now, I understand as a gardener that it's very clear that panicum and miscanthus look different. Yes, that's correct. But unless you were into the specific architectural form of the grass in detail, if you were just looking for a grass that was tall and upright and about the height and that bloomed and, you know, one grass looks like another at a distance for a non-collector, then we thought panicum and its new cultivars was a very good alternative and native to the mid-Atlantic. Now remember, folks, this is a mid-Atlantic biased. If I was doing this in the Northwest, I'd have to go check my facts, make sure that just because I say it's panicum here is native, maybe not such a good idea in other parts of the country. So as you're taking notes, remember, if you're not here in the Chesapeake, take what I say with a grain of salt when I recommend a native. Ask yourself, is it native in your area? I don't think that I want to spend a lot of time. We'll never finish if we go into details. Again, you can get this information from many sources now. No longer have to rely on my PowerPoint and talks. The characteristics of panicum that map neatly onto miscanthus. Again, just showing you how beautiful the grass is and how well it fits into a garden, and that you don't need to be part of the problem. You don't need to worry about whether you have an alien exotic that's truly sterile or 1% sterile. You could go with a native and get the same look. You also don't have to worry in the case of panicum that you don't have the choices. You have a lot of choices in this native grass. Now here's for you tomato throwers, this is not native. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it. This is a sterile interspecific hybrid, Calamagrostis. If you want something that is a little taller and, well, it's not native, so I'm not going to dwell on it, but it is sterile. It's an interspecific hybrid, Calamagrostis or summer reed grass. Don't want to spend time on the non-native, and I think that's one of two in this. So, moving on to Lythrum. This was our decision. We went for Liatris varieties, a native herb, herbaceous perennial in the mid-Atlantic area. We thought that this was a good replacement. Gave you the same flower type. Pretty much, I can't say it'll grow in the cracks of concrete, but it, in a garden setting, wherever Lythrum grows, it will grow. Now, I have to admit that if you drive your go-kart over it repeatedly, unlike Lythrum, which will come back, you probably can work at killing this if you really work at it. But it's native. It gives you the summer flower. It gives you the effect that you're looking for, and you're not contributing to giant monocultures in our wetlands that change the entire ecosystem. There are ways of getting the same look using a native choice and not having to go with Lythrum. Gay feather, blazing stars, native to Maryland, and I think it's actually native in the Midwest. At least I'm claiming it is. You can all write me and say I'm wrong. Look for information. It prefers rich, moist soils, so just like Miscanthus, it actually likes those little pondy, let's say the edges of your rain garden. Summer bloomer, doesn't run, so great choice. Liatris is one of many possibilities that you could use to replace the aggressive invader purple loosestrife. Just so you get the point here, this is Liatris in garden setting, and for the landscape illiterate and people who are passing by at 60 miles an hour, unless you're a horticulturist and a gardener or a taxonomist, my guess is you can't tell the difference between the Lythrum and the Liatris at 60 miles an hour a quarter mile away on a road. So if you're looking for the color and the effect, go with Liatris. Now, if it's not the form of the flower, but the toughness that you're looking for in full sun and wide soil conditions, you can go with native hibiscus. I'm using the term native here. I realize that some of you will say, well, if it's domesticated, it's not native. Okay, you can get native seed sources that are not domesticated cultivars of swamp mallows. So while I'm talking about cultivars for purists who want native only, the swamp mallow, you can get seed and you can raise your own, and you can have a native hibiscus that blooms from Memorial Day or maybe a little later depending on where you are till first frost, and is pretty indestructive once it gets established. If you're out for ostentatious flowering, you can't beat the native hibiscus. Again, comes in several species, all of which are native. You can go to a garden center and get a domesticated cultivated variety, or you can collect seed and get native seed collection. Either way, it's still not the aggressive spreader alien exotics that cause the problems and so much damage. If you have a lot of room, and folks, I mean a lot of room, you can try for Filipendula. You're not doing this at a townhouse, and I'm not going to dwell on this plant. I am going to have to move along a little bit because we only have an hour or a little less. But Filipendula, if you have a lot of room, queen of the prairie. Another native plant, substitute for a very tall substitute for Lythrum. Alternative to Lythrum, Monarda, or bee balm. My point here is you don't have to be limited as a gardener. Lythrum is not the only choice you have in flowering summer herbaceous tough plants. There are many native plants that can fit into your needs. Let's move on to ground covers. The interesting thing about ground covers are you would actually specify the specifics of what you need when you want a ground cover. You actually want an invasive species. You want an indestructible plant that nothing eats, that you can walk on, step on, and abuse. That's what you're looking for in a ground cover. And what fits the bill? Well, nothing like shade kudzu. I'm sorry, English ivy. English ivy. Let's try to be technically correct here. Other problem ground covers, not so much in my opinion so get those tomatoes ready. Not so much a problem in the Washington area, he ducks quickly, but certainly a problem in the Midwest, the Ohio Valley, Vinca minor or periwinkle. Big problem in certain locations. Once you got it, you've got a major problem, and then it creeps out. It destroys the possibility of having the spring ephemerals. It just blankets the ground in natural areas. And it's a staple of the landscape industry when they're specifying a low-maintenance ground cover. These are real big problems for gardeners. How do we replace Vinca or English ivy? Well, here again, Mid-Atlantic folks, I'm Mid-Atlantic centric. We can develop a program for your environment in your area. Just let me know. Pachysandra, the native one, not the Japanese spurge, folks. This is the native one. The good news is we have a native Pachysandra. The bad news is it's not evergreen, so most people don't plant it as a ground cover because they want evergreen. But if you like Pachysandra and you don't mind your landscape looking like it's supposed to in the wintertime, brown here in Maryland, then this is a good choice. Pachysandra procumbens, Allegheny spurge, a native alternative to English ivy and vinca. Again, in the interest of time, I know hopefully we're recording this and you can go back and get this information, but this information is online now. Here's one of my favorites for the Mid-Atlantic in a shady area. If you need a ground cover, I have 7 acres and our ravines are starting to fill in with Christmas fern, and it is evergreen and the deer don't eat it. At least my deer don't. Yours may, mine don't. Deer don't tend to like ferns, at least, well, not the Christmas fern, the native fern. What a great replacement for English ivy in a shade situation. Again, I'm moving on here just in the interest of time. You can find all about Christmas fern just about anywhere you go online. How about a blooming ground cover that's native? Foam flower, tiarella. Look at those flowers. You don't get that. You know, vinca, you get these little blue flowers if you're really lucky here in Maryland, or unlucky if you're a land manager. What about foam flower? Naturalizes. It's not evergreen, but it's not going to cause a problem. If you're a gardener next to a county park or a city municipal park and you plant foam flower, you will have a friend for life in your park manager, because they're not going to mind that you are putting native plants near their borders. There are all kinds of cultivars, domesticated hybrids. Again, for those of you that, you know, native means the nursery industry didn't touch it, well, then you go for the non-cultivar, non-varietal form of it. If you just want to make sure you're not doing an invasive, and you know, this isn't a native-only talk, this is please don't plant the invasive talk, then there are all kinds of tiarellas that you can look at and varieties. Phlox stolonifera, yep, native here in the Mid-Atlantic, early spring bloomer. It's not really, some nursery people, and I guess I would say it's evergreen. It's not much to look at in January. It's sort of evergreen. You sort of know where it is, but man, when spring comes and it blooms in pinks, blues, and whites, what a great plant. And native. You don't have to plant English ivy. Okay, so I put mostly in the title, more tomatoes coming. Okay, I can't help it. Epimedium, barren wart, bishop's hat. I'm not going to spend a lot of time. What a great ground cover, and it sure takes so long to make this, probably 10 to 12 years to make the picture on the left. Blooms in the spring, not evergreen, dry shade, just not a problem. However, not a native, and so I'm not going to dwell on it. But I managed to get it in anyway. Vines. So that was ground cover. That, again, this is an introduction. I know I'm racing through and you're trying to write frantically, and I repeat, all of this information is online. Certainly your local Native Plant Society has some version of what I'm talking about. The Nature Conservancy. There are so many people now that put this kind of information out that didn't when I first gave this talk 20 years ago. Vines are, by their nature, let me back up. If invasive species are what you want when you're specifying a ground cover, because they're kind of indestructible, when you're trying to identify an invasive species and you see a vine, that almost certainly is going to be a problem at the highest level, because the plant is designed to put all of its energy. It doesn't have to build a trunk. It doesn't have to make all of this support structure. It can put all of its energy into growth. And so when you get a foreign plant that can establish, and it is a vine, and it seeds or spreads by rhizomes, or both. Wow, that's the perfect poster child for an invasive plant. Think kudzu. Kudzu was, supposed to be an ornamental plant when it was introduced in 1876. Didn't like gardens, it turned out, but vines are beautiful. Vines are easy for the industry. They propagate easily. People love vines because in a garden, if you don't like your neighbor's fence, you plant a vine and it crawls up the fence and then destroys the fence. You can engage in vegetative terrorism by using vines, and vines are beautiful. And so the problem is we've got these wonderfully dangerous, what I call them dangerous beauties, that come from other places and other countries that once they pull the fence down, they get into our natural areas and they wreak havoc big time. Because they're vines, they don't stay put. So finding solutions, finding different plants that are native that do the same, give you the same aesthetic or practical effect to some of these great invaders has always challenged the nursery and landscape industry. Here we have wisteria. There's nothing more impressive in Maryland than going under a wisteria vine that has crept up an 80-foot white oak and smell the fragrance and then being landscape illiterate and think the oak tree is blooming, when in fact the Chinese wisteria or Japanese wisteria is pulling the branches of the oak down. But you don't know that because you're only a part-time gardener. So you see the beautiful fragrant purple flowers in the oak tree and think the oak tree's blooming. And I'm not making this up. That's what my customers, there was a beautiful white oak with wisteria in it out in one of our Washington neighborhoods, affluent neighborhood. And every time the wisteria bloomed in the oak tree, my customers would come and ask for the oak tree with the purple flowers. And we don't need to do that. We have our own American wisteria. You want a wisteria, you like the flower, a little smaller, but I'm telling you, when you get this thing going, the flower may be smaller, but the quantity of flowers is greater, and so the effect is the same. What is the difference? And there is a difference. The alien species, the exotic wisterias are highly fragrant, and if you use your imagination, the American wisterias are fragrant. So we can't do anything about that, but if you have a trellis, you want a wisteria, you like the effect, you can do the American wisteria. And if you're next to a national battlefield or park, the Park Service will love you. Not as rampant is an understatement. Well, on the other hand, if you are determined that you really need an aggressive vine, I can't imagine why, but all right, you need an aggressive vine. Well, here's a native one. I don't know what else to say. If you need an aggressive vine that can compete with kudzu in pulling your house down, we got it for you. Comes in all kinds of colors, and the nursery industry has varieties of this. Again, purists, you must be running out of tomatoes by now. Don't throw any more at me. For those of you that think a vine has to really be able to pull down structures, then we have a native one for you with blooms. Why would you ever need to plant a non-native vine? At least in the Mid-Atlantic, we can meet your needs. So trumpet vine, some people who are not immersed in invasive species would describe it as invasive. Of course, the federal definition would rule that out because an invasive has to be non-native. And a trumpet vine is native, therefore it's simply aggressive. And if you make a mistake and put it next to your house and it goes up onto your roof, it will pull down your, the drain spouts and everything. So you need to think what you're doing. The thing is, you're never going to get a monoculture of Campsis radicans in a natural ecosystem. If a large tree falls, the trumpet vine will curl all over the large tree, the native oak tree, and the empty space left by the tree, but eventually, as new plants come and the tree rots away, the vine will just go back into the shadows until another tree falls. You'll never get trumpet vine to be the only species in a natural area. It's part of the ecosystem. It's part of the complex system. It belongs there. It's not going to outcompete the other native natural species. Unlike wisteria, which can become the only thing in an acre. Like Lythrum, Asian wisterias can take over acres of land. And nothing else is there. Nothing. And I haven't even talked now about butterflies, insects. And we probably don't have time. But of course, the natives are hosting native insects. So if you're trying to plant as a garden of color and wonder and beauty, and you like songbirds, then of course you want native plants because native insects eat native plants and native birds eat native insects. When you start planting things from Asia where our native insects won't eat them, like English ivy, then of course you don't get songbirds. I know this is a little complicated. Maybe we'll do a webinar on the food web and Doug Tallamy's approach to this, which fits really nicely into this. As you plant native alternatives, you are helping the food web. You're getting those songbirds, and you don't have to, put several feeders out there and shoot the squirrels. This is cute. When I was growing up, I was told this was a weed, but of course, in Europe, this is their version of English ivy. They plant Virginia creeper because it's a really great vine, and then we rip it out. The grass is always greener on the other side. Has real meaning. Virginia creeper, you have to be careful. You're not going to plant this in a townhouse unless you're out there really gardening on a what do I want to say? Be careful. In an urban setting, perhaps Virginia creeper is not the appropriate native for all situations. Here's one of my favorites. We have a really bad plant, Japanese honeysuckle. Now, when I was growing up, you only found it on old fence rows and barbed wire, and you could get the little sweet-tasting sugar water out of the white and yellow flowers, and it was kind of there, and it was sweet-smelling, and it's taking over my 7 acres now. It really smells wonderful at the end of May, beginning of June. However, it comes in exactly one color combination, yellow and white. But we have native. Why would you plant the Japanese honeysuckle that will take over your garden? It will take over your garden and the public park and the state of Maryland's forests and whatever is in its pathway. Think of it as sort of blooming, well, I don't know what to call it, blooming kudzu, but kudzu blooms too and is fragrant. When we have these native alternatives, they're not fragrant. That's the deal. But they come in all kinds of colors. How cool is this? You get color. Well, butterfly bush, this is sort of the shrub version of Lythrum. As early as the 90s, I've been reading reports, 10 to 20,000 seeds per panicles. Seed bank lasts, I don't want to, since this is being recorded, a long time. I don't know what the current state of the art is. There are reports of it coming up in natural areas, and it's a big staple. Is this a problem in suburban Washington? I'll leave that to the professional experts to make a judgment call, sort of like Finca, but certainly in some areas this is sort of escaping from our garden, and we can continue to introduce Buddleia, making sure that eventually we're going to get an infestation that takes off. Some people would disagree, so let's just agree to disagree. But there's all kinds of alternatives to Buddleia, except, of course, because they're native, they weren't, nobody focused on them. Again, I'm looking at the clock, so forgive me for sort of moving fast, but summer sweet clethra is what a great alternative, and nobody's going to complain. And if you need the big purple flower, let me point out that in the middle of this picture, this is a home near the Potomac River in Maryland. That collection of eupatorium is about 12 to 15 feet tall, and so you can judge how far across. This is not a small plant, though there are dwarf versions of it. If you need a place for butterflies and you need a native eupatorium, moving fast because I haven't even gotten to the trees, and you know, asters can replace buddleia. I have asters coming up in my fields. I actually mow around them to let the asters sort of seed so that I get late summer, early fall blooming from asters. What do we do about our barberry friend? Witch alder. Again, looking at the clock. Barberry is so ubiquitous that the industry, it's just easier to think, what do I want to say? It's so part of the landscape design palette that we don't think about, gee, we could do better. That we could do something native that fits into the food chain and isn't going to take over the understory of a natural area, creating a thorny habitat that nobody can move in. You're never going to have a problem with witch alder escaping and having any land manager complain about the escape. It belongs there. Again, comes in domesticated alternatives. Virginia sweetspire, another native alternative. How cool is this plant? I mean, this is really great stuff when it comes to natives. And again, I'm talking about the mid-Atlantic. For those of you who don't live here in the center of the universe, you have just as many unique natives as we have that we can use to map onto your particular local garden community and develop a palette of alternatives. We can give people choices. Winterberry lights up with its berries at this time of year and is a natural bird feeder, on top of having, you know, it's a four-season plant. Yeah, I'm moving fast, I know. I'm watching the clock watcher. Well, this is one of my favorite because the state of Maryland likes to plant this plant as a border around some of its government buildings. Well, I don't know if it's the state, maybe it's the county. Because sometimes our zoning regs haven't kept up with invasive species, and people love burning bush. Landscapers, you know, McDonald's colors are yellow and red, so they put red barberry in this plant, and they get the red against the yellow building. They get the landscape to speak in their corporate colors. Homeowners like the brilliant red bush stuck out in the middle of their manicured lawn because in the fall it brings brilliant color. There's no doubt about that, and it is indestructible. You can hit it with the lawnmower and the weed whacker, and you'll have absolutely no problem, and you won't be able to get rid of it. Again, sweetspire might be, from a textural point of view, a replacement plant for burning bush. But if the color is what you're looking for, sweetspire gives you that red fall color also. Maybe not quite as compact, but at 80 miles an hour or 30 miles an hour as you drive by on the suburban road, it's going to look like a red bush to you. Chokeberry, another native, giving you the same look, the same effect. My point that I'm trying to drive home here are these aren't the only choices. These are a few of the choices that allow us to move from a dependency on foreign exotics to natives. I think I might actually get through because here we are at trees, and of course this used to be my county's tree, and the reason it was, among other reasons, was my family's nursery was busy selling like 60,000 of these, and it was introduced right here by government officials at a plant introduction experiment station, the Bradford pear. These are pictures from the road near the plant introduction station where it was sort of cultivated in the 30s and 40s. I describe this as the rabbit of trees. Once it gets loose, there's no such thing as one Bradford. And why do you have to plant a calorie pear? Remember, Bradford is just one variety. There are many, many varieties of calorie pears now, and they are loose, shall we say. They're promiscuous. But Here in the Mid-Atlantic, we have native alternatives with 4 seasons of interest. Let me say that again. Look at this. You've got winter, spring, summer, fall interest, berries, fall colors, flowers, anything you could want. And here it is, the Allegheny serviceberry. Why do you need to plant a plant from China? What exactly is it that you are thinking you need? This one you need a little bigger property, and perhaps you don't want to plant it by its front door because sometimes it can look, it gets a little bit of rust on the leaves. If you know what you're looking for, shh, don't tell anybody. The only way they'll know it is if you show it to them. But if you have a large enough property, you know, maybe a commercial property, and you're looking for an alternative to Bradford's, this probably is a nice alternative. And look at this. The berries in the wintertime look like Christmas ornaments. They are bright, standout ornaments, and they feed birds all the way through February. Even in the snow, these berries hang on until the birds have plucked them off. Hawthorns, native plant. Don't need to plant a Bradford pear. Sourwood, look at the color on that. Why do you need a Bradford? That's the question you've got to ask yourself. If you're planting these aggressive invasive ornamentals, is it the only solution? Is it the only species? Is there no native that will fill 90% of your criteria? Or is it just that it's easier? Virginia fringe tree. All of these, by the way, are easily found. Nothing that I've talked about is obscure in the nursery industry. The nursery industry in the Mid-Atlantic sells everything I'm talking about, and up until a few years ago didn't even bother telling you they were native. They just sold all of these things. These are not hard to find plants. Again, in your community, if you're not in the Mid-Atlantic, your nursery is carrying natives, but they may not be bothering to tell you they're natives. Norway maples. There are alternatives to Norway maples. You don't have to plant the Norway maple if you've got to have a maple. The red maple is native to Maryland. Let me just go back and say, you know, Norways are nice, but Norways create monocultures. So why not plant a native maple if the maple and its fall color and its shape is what you're looking for? We have something right here that fits the bill. And remember, it fits right into the food web, too. Black gums. Again, I know I've raced through, and some of you are saying, doggone, he won't slow down. Well, hopefully this got recorded, and if it doesn't, all of these varieties are now, 20 years ago, this information was a little hard to find. You can find this on Google now. This is not hard to find information. No rocket science here, folks. There are thousands of great species and cultivars for gardens that are native to your ecosystem. Well, maybe if you're in the desert Southwest, it's hundreds. Thousands if you're lucky to live in the Mid-Atlantic. Maybe some of our ecosystem, it's hundreds or dozens. Whatever it is, it's relative, and they exist. You don't have to choose between beauty and doing the right thing. That's the big point. Can I say that again? Native, planting native, going native, or going non-invasive doesn't mean you have to give up beauty. That's a canard. That doesn't exist. Natives can be beautiful too, and beautiful using the same criteria as the non-natives. Colston Burrell had a book a few years ago on native alternatives. I should have put the link in. Colston, C-O-L-S-T-O-N, Burrell, B-U-R-R-E-L-L. And there are many other books now and websites. And the nursery industry 20 years ago would have looked at you a little askance if you came in looking for natives. That's not true anymore. Your garden centers can certainly answer your questions and help you out here because they do know and they are the experts. Here in Maryland, we try to do the right thing as best we can. We have our Invasive Species Council with our invaders, the bad guys and alternatives sometimes if they're plants. and we have the Mid-Atlantic. Now I hope it is. I hope MA-IPSI now. It used to be MA-IPSI, and I'm getting, I guess, old. Helping you make the right choices. And across the United States, you have invasive species councils and invasive plant councils, native plant societies, all of whom are there to help you get the information. We're lucky today, really lucky, at how much information about natives and exotics are now available online that were not when I first got introduced to this entire field in the very late 80s and early 90s, when there was no information. Today, you can find information. So thank you. That was your introduction to native, mostly, alternatives to mid-Atlantic invasives.